Hey there, hope you're having a wonderful day. In this video, we're going to be coding the game Tic Tac Toe in Python. So what you see here is the game that we'll be creating in this tutorial. So you can see we have X's turn here and we have 9 tiles and a restart button. So I can play Tic Tac Toe. And if I put in X here, you'll see that it is now O's turn. And I can just alternate like so. And you can see we get X is the winner over here. And then I can restart the game. And then you can see O is the winner. Okay, so this is what we'll be creating in this tutorial. And before we begin coding, I just want to quickly mention that I am working on various coding tutorial series. So I have programming basics with Python and C++, and I have Python tutorials, which I'll continue working on. So I have Snake on my channel, and now this is Tic Tac Toe. So in the future, I will add more coding tutorials for game projects in Python. And I have a few game projects in Java. So I have Flappy Bird and Blackjack, Tic Tac Toe, and Snake, and so on. So I'll continue working on tutorials in Java as well. And I have tutorials in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So you can see I have tutorials on how to make Doodle Jump, Breakout, Space Invaders, Flappy Bird, Wordle, Sudoku, Candy Crush, and so on. So there are many coding tutorials on my channel, and you can find this list on kennyupcoding.com. And if you want to stay up to date for more coding tutorials, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Alright, let's begin. Just go ahead and create one Python file and name it Tic Tac Toe. And for this tutorial, I will be using Visual Studio Code. If you want to follow along with Visual Studio Code, I have a tutorial on how to install Visual Studio Code with Python, and I'll link it in the video description. Alright, so let's begin coding. So the first thing I'm going to do is import tkinter, and this stands for TK interface, and this is our graphical user interface library. And for our game, we have 2 players, player X and O. So I'm going to create 2 variables. Player X, and this is going to be the X character, and player O is going to be the O character. And then we need a variable to keep track of who the current player is. So I'm going to create a variable called cur_player and set it to player X. So by default, I'm just going to make player X the starting player of the game. And now what I need is a tic-tac-toe board. So I'm going to create a 2D list, and within each row, I'm just going to fill it with zeros. And I'm just going to format this a bit, so it's apparent that we have a 3x3 board. Okay, so we have a 3x3 board. And for our game, I want to add some custom colors. So let's define some colors here with the RGB values. And actually, I'm just going to use the hexadecimal representation of these colors. So the blue color will be hash 4584B6. And then the color yellow is going to be hash FFDE57. And then color gray, this is the background color. This is going to be hash 343434. And color light gray, this is going to be hash 646464, like so. And there are some built-in colors where you can just type in the color name. For instance, you can type in green or red, but I want specific colors, so I'm going to use the hexadecimal values. And if you're wondering, these are actually the colors of the Python logo. So if you look up the colors for the Python logo, you can see FFDE57 is yellow, and then 4584B6 is the blue, and 646464 is the gray. So since we're coding the game in Python, I thought it'd be nice to use these colors, but you can use any colors you like. Alright, so now that we have the variables for our game, let's create the window. So to create a window, I'm going to create a variable and assign it tkinter.tk. So this is going to create the game window, and I'm going to give a title for our window. So I'm going to call it Tic Tac Toe. And then I'm going to make it so that you cannot resize the window. So I'm going to do window not resizable. And for the width and height, I'm setting it to false. So this basically means that the user cannot use a mouse to expand the width and height of the window. And then afterwards, let's do window.main loop. And this is going to create a loop that will keep the window open. So basically in programming, when you run your code, at the very end, if you run all the code, your program ends. With this main loop, we can keep the window active until the user clicks on the X button on the window. Alright, so let's save and run the program. And you can see we have our window over here. Alright, now that we have our window, let's add some components to the window for our game. So I'm going to create a frame that will hold the components. So the components are the buttons and the text label. So I'm going to place these inside the frame, and then I'll place the frame inside the window. So here I'm going to create a frame, tkinter.frame, and I'm going to pass in a parameter, window. So this means I am placing this frame inside the window. Alright, so we have a frame inside the window. Let's add some components. So the first component I'm going to create is the text label. So let's create a variable called label. And let's create a label. So tkinter.label. And I'm going to place this inside the frame. And if I hover over label, you can see we have a bunch of parameters here that we can pass in. So I can assign a background color and a foreground color. So foreground color refers to the text color, and I can also assign a text value. So by default, I'm just going to make the text display the current player's turn. So text is equal to current player plus '(s) turn. And I can also assign it a font. So font is equal to consoles, and let's make the font size 20. And then let's assign background. So this is the background color, and I'm going to make it color gray. So it's going to be this hexadecimal value that we assigned here. And then let's assign it a foreground color. So foreground is equal to, and here I'm just going to write white. Alright, now if I save and run the program, you can see we don't see the label, and that is because we need to organize where the label is. So here I'm just going to do label.pack and then frame.pack. And so this is going to structure this label component and place it in our frame. So if I save and run the program, you can see we have this label that is now visible, and the background color is gray and the font is white, and it's displaying X's turn. So just to go over the structure of our game, you see we have a window, which is this red box, and then we have a frame, which is the blue box, and then the green boxes are the individual components or widgets. So basically, we're going to create a window and then a frame, and then we're going to place each individual component inside the frame, and then we'll place the frame inside the window. Okay? And for the structuring, we're going to use a grid system. So just like with lists in Python, we have indices for the grid. So from left to right, we have columns, and up and down, we have rows. So basically, we're going to place the text label in the first row, which is the 0th index. And for the 9 buttons, we're going to place them at 1, 2, and 3. And for the restart button, we're going to place it at the index 4, which is the 5th row. And we're going to have the text label and the restart button take up the entire row. Whereas for the individual buttons for a Tic Tac Toe grid, we'll have 3 buttons in each row. So over here, instead of doing label.pack, I'm going to do label.grid, and I'm going to set row equal to 0 and column equal to 0. So basically, this label is going to take up this space in our grid system. So now if I save and run the program, you can see we get the same thing as before, except now we have this label at index 0, 0, which is row is 0 and column 0. So it's occupying this block of the grid. Alright, so we have our label. Now let's add the 9 buttons for our game board. And here I just initialize each one to 0, but we're going to do a double for loop and assign each one a button. So we're going to change the 0 to a button. So let's do a double for loop. So for row in range 3. For column in range 3, I'm going to do board at index row column, and I'm going to assign it tkinter.button, and we're going to add this button to the frame, and by default the text is going to be empty. Let's make the font Consoles. The font size will be 50, and let's make this bold, and let's set the background color to color gray. The foreground color is going to be color blue, and here I'm going to assign it a width and height, and this is basically a scaling. So the width and height is going to be relative to the screen units, and I don't want to go into depth on how that works. You can play around with the numbers if you want, but here I'm going to assign width to 4 and height to 1. So again, this is not in pixels, this is in screen units. And when we click on a button, we want an action to happen. So I'm going to create a lambda function here, and I want to pass in the row and column number. So row is going to be row and column is going to be column. And I'm going to call a function called setTile and pass in the row and column. So we need to define this function. So up here, I'm going to define a function called setTile, and it'll take in a row and column. And for now, I'm just going to put pass so that we can have this function defined, but it's not going to do anything. Later on, we're going to fill in this function. And so this function takes in a row and column number, and this is in reference to this board. So let's say I click on a button in the middle and I want to assign it X. Well, the row is going to be 1 and the column is going to be 1. So at indices 1, 1, I'll place an X over here. For that reason, I'm using a lambda function because here we already know what the row and column numbers are for each button. Therefore, we can just assign setTile to each button, but with each button, we're going to assign it the row and column numbers that we have here. All right, so we have our buttons and they're added to the frame. We need to organize them in our grid. So for each button, I'm going to do board of row column dot grid, and I'm going to set row equal to row plus 1, and column is going to be column. And the reason why I'm doing row plus 1 is because index starts at 0, but at row 0, we have the label. So I'm basically shifting everything down by 1. So again, at index 0, we have this label. So instead of doing indices 0, 1, 2, we're going to do 1, 2, 3 for these buttons. All right, so now if I save and run the program, you can see we have our 9 buttons over here, and the background color is gray. And you might notice something interesting here, and that is this text label. It is occupying the grid space at row 0 and column 0. What we want to do is we want this text label to stretch across. So what we can do is we can have this label take up 3 column spaces. So over here, I can add another parameter, and that is column span, and I'll just assign it 3. So now if I save and run the program, you can see it is now occupying 3 columns. So that's why it's centered like this. But the thing is, it is not stretched. So we want to stretch this from left to right. So to stretch it from left to right, we need to add another parameter, and that is sticky. So it's basically saying that we want to stick it from left to right, or in this case, it is west to east. So we have WE. All right, now if I save and run the program, you can see our label stretches from west to east, or left to right. All right, now one more thing I need to add is the reset button down here. So over here, I'm going to add a button, tkinter.button, and we're placing this inside the frame, and the text is going to say restart. Font is going to be Consoles, and we'll make the font size 20. Background color is going to be color gray. Foreground is going to be white. And when we click the restart button, we want to restart the game. So I'm going to set command, and we're going to call a function called new game. So up here, I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm going to define a new function called newGame, and I'll just pass for now. All right, so afterwards, I'm going to do button.grid, and this is going to occupy row 4 and column 0. All right, so now if I save and run the program, you can see our button is down here at row 4, but I want this to take up 3 column spaces and stretch from left to right. So let's go ahead and do that. So here I'm going to do column span is equal to 3, and sticky is going to be west to east, so WE. And if you want it to be stretched vertically, you would do NS, which is north to south. All right, now if I save and run the program, you can see we have our Tic Tac Toe UI ready. So we have the label, the 9 buttons, and the restart button. Now there's one more thing that I want to address before we implement the functions for the buttons, and that is when I run the program, this window does not open in the center of our screen. So if I save and run the program again, you can see it'll open in a different location each time. So here you can see it opens over here, and the blue logo for Python is over here to the left. If I close this and I run it again, you can see it opens slightly to the right and below this blue Python logo. Okay, so I want this to always open at the center of our screen. So in order to position our window, we need to do a little bit of math. I'm going to do window.update. So this is going to update all the width and height variables of the window after we've added all the components. So we need the width and height of our window and our screen so we can do the math. So window width is going to be window.winfo width. Window height is going to be window.winfo height. And then we need our screen width and height. So screen width is going to be window.winfo screen width. And screen height is going to be window.winfo screen height. And over here, we need to define an X and Y position for our window. So window X is going to be int of screen width divided by 2 minus window width divided by 2. And window Y is going to be int of screen height divided by 2 minus window height divided by 2. And then afterwards, we need to format the window with these new X and Y values. So the format is going to be a string, and it's going to be width X height plus X position plus Y position. So I'm going to do window.geometry. And here I'm going to use an F string, and this allows us to inject variables as string values. So with the curly brackets, I'm going to do window width X window height plus window X plus window Y. All right, now if I save and run the program, you can see our game opens at the center of our screen. So now that we have our game window with all the UI components ready, let's make it so that if I click on any tile, we display an X or an O. So over here, you can see by default, we set the text to an empty string. So if I just place an X here and I save and run the program, you can see we have all X's over here. So what we need to do is change this text field. So I'm going to change this back. And within our setTile function, I'm going to change the text field for the button that was clicked. Now in Python, with global variables, if we change the value of the variables in a function, we need to declare them as global in the function. So here I'm going to declare curPlayer as a global variable. And the reason is I'm going to alternate between player X and player O. And if I didn't declare as global variable and I just did curPlayer is equal to player O, this is actually going to create a local variable that is not the same variable as this one over here. So it's going to create a variable that is only accessible within this setTile function. So if I click on a tile, I'm going to set board of row column. So this is going to be one of the 9 buttons in this board variable. I'm going to set the text field of the button equal to curPlayer. And then afterwards, I'm going to switch the current player. So if cur player is equal to player O, I'm going to do cur player is equal to player X. Else, cur player is equal to player O. And then afterwards, I'm going to set the text for the label. So label text is going to update and show the new current player. So cur player's turn. So now if I save and run the program, you can see if I click on a button, it now displays X, and now it's O's turn, and I can alternate between X and O. And there is one issue, and that is I can overwrite an existing tile that is already marked. So you can see over here we have an X here, and it's O's turn. If I click on this tile, we can actually overwrite it. And I can keep overwriting it by clicking on it. So before we update the text, we want to make a check to see if the text is empty. So if board of row column text, if this is not equal to empty, then I'm going to return. So this is going to exit the function and not do anything. So only when it's empty can we add an X or an O to that tile. Alright, so now if I save and run the program, I can mark an X here, O here, and an X here. And if I try to mark this as an O, you can see it will not work, and it's still O's turn. Okay? Alright, so now that we can mark the board, what we need to do is check for winning conditions. So down here, I'm going to call a function called checkWinner. And let's define it over here. So when we check winner, we want to determine whether the game is over or not. So down here, I'm going to add two more variables. So here I'm going to set turns to 0 and game over to false. So when it's game over, we're going to assign it to true and prevent the player from clicking on the buttons for the tic-tac-toe board. So we have a game over when we have 3 in a row or column, or 3 in a diagonal, or we have a tie if 9 turns have passed. So every time a user clicks on a button, we are going to increment turns by 1. So in this checkWinner function, let's check for winning conditions. So here I'm going to mark turns and game over as global, and we're going to increment turns by 1. So first we're going to check horizontally. So for row in range 3, if board of row at index 0 text is equal to board row of index 1 text is equal to board of row 2 text, and board of row 0 text is not equal to an empty string. This means that for the current row, we have 3 in a row. So at columns 0, 1, and 2, for the current row, we have 3 X's or 3 O's in a row. If that is the case, I'm going to change the text in the label to say X is the winner or O is the winner. And I can do so like I did over here, but I want to make it a little fancier. I also want to change the font color. So instead of doing it like this, where we access the text attribute using the brackets, I'm going to use the config function. So label.config, text is going to be board of row 0 text. So this is X or O, and I'm going to do plus is the winner. And I'm going to make the foreground color yellow. And then for each button in this row, I'm going to change the background and foreground colors. So for column in range 3, board of row column dot config, foreground is going to be color yellow, and background is going to be color light gray. And if we have a game over, I'm going to set game over to true and then return. All right, now let's save and run the program. So we need 3 in a row. And you can see X is the winner, and each tile, the background is going to be a light gray color, and the font is going to be yellow as well. Now there's one issue here, and that is I can actually still click the buttons to play the game, and we don't want this to happen, so in our set tile function, we're going to make a check. So here I'm going to make a check. If game over, we're just going to return. Alright, so now if I save and run the program, and I play the game, you can see X is the winner, and now when I click on the other buttons, nothing happens. Alright, now let's check vertically. So this is going to be similar to 3 in a row, except we're going to switch the row and columns. So for column in range 3, if board of 0 column text is equal to board of 1 column text is equal to board of 2 column text, and board of 0 column text is not equal to an empty string, then we're going to do the same thing. So label.config text is going to be board of 0 column text plus is the winner, and foreground is going to be color yellow. And then let's change each button within the column. So for row in range 3, we can just copy and paste this line, or actually these lines here, and there we go. Now if I save and run the program, if I get 3 in a column, you can see O is the winner. Alright, now let's check diagonally. So over here we don't need a for loop. Instead we can just directly check if board 0, 0 text is equal to board 1, 1 text is equal to board 2, 2 text, and board 0, 0 text is not equal to an empty string. I'm going to change the label. So here I'm just going to copy paste this line over here and change this column to 0, 0. And then here I'll do for I in range 3, board of index I. We're going to do .config. Foreground is going to be yellow, and background is going to be color light gray. And then let's do game over is equal to true and return. Alright, so let's save and run the program. And then here, if I get 3 X's diagonally, you can see we get X is the winner. Now we're just missing the other diagonal. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. And over here, instead of 0, 0, we want 0, 2. And the last one is going to be 2, 0. And here we'll make this 0, 2. So here we need to manually do each button since we don't have a loop combination. So I'm going to do board 0, 2 .config. Foreground is going to be color yellow. Background is going to be color light gray. And I'm just going to copy and paste this. And let's change this one to 1, 1, and the last one to 2, 0. And let's take these 2 lines and copy them here. So game over is going to be true, and we return. Alright, now if I save and run the program, now if I play this game here, you can see 3 anti-diagonal in a row. And I might have missed something because this text is not turning yellow. So let's go and see what happened. And I forgot to configure the text. So I'm going to copy and paste this and change this to 0, 2. Okay. So let's save and run the program again. All right. And we have always the winner. Now we need to add the tie condition. So if turns is equal to 9, then we're going to do game over and set it to true. and label.config. Text is going to be tie, and foreground is going to be color yellow. All right, now if I save and run the program, so let's try to get a tie here. Okay, here you can see we have a tie. Now we have a fully functional game of Tic Tac Toe. All that's left to do is make this restart button work. So restarting the game is actually pretty simple. All we need to do is reset some of the variables to their starting conditions. So here I'm just going to mark global for turns and game over. For the current player, we're going to make it so that loser starts first next turn. So when we have our check winner function, before we call check winner, we've already switched players. So if there is a winner in this function call, that means the previous player won. So if X goes, current player becomes O, but we're making the check winner on X. So if X wins, then O starts next turn. So over here, I'm just going to reset the variables. So turns is going to be 0. Game over is going to be false. And then let's update the label. So update label text so that it shows current player plus turn. And then we need to update the styling for the buttons and the values for the buttons. So for row in range 3, for column in range 3, board of row column dot config, text is going to be empty again. Foreground is going to be color blue, and background is going to be color gray. All right, so let's save and run the program. All right, so let's play the game. And you can see X is the winner, so we expect O to go next. So I'm going to restart, and now it's O's turn. And it seems that I forgot to make the font color white, so let's go ahead and do that. So instead of doing it like this, I'm just going to do label.config. Text is equal to cur player plus turn, and foreground is going to be white. All right, now let's save and run the program. All right, it's X's turn, so let's play the game. X is the winner. We can't click anything else, so let's restart the game. Now it's O's turn. O is the winner. Let's restart again. Now it's X's turn. And here you can see we have a tie. So X just went. So now we're going to make O go first again. And we have X is the winner. O is the winner. And I can click restart again. And if I play mid-game, we can also restart it, like so. Okay, so we have a fully functional game of tic-tac-toe. So that's all for this tutorial. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you did, make sure you give this video a like. And if you have any questions, let me know down below in the comments. And if you want to stay up to date for more tutorials like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.